This is The Behavioral Divide, brought to you by Avantis Investors, where we bring together both academic research and real-world financial advice to uncover insights that may help us make better financial decisions. I am Jeremy Thornton, back again with our host, Professor Hal Hershfield. And Hal, I have to say, I've loved all the episodes that we've done, but this one may be the one I'm most excited about folks getting to see. I had such an amazing time putting this one together. I mean, for me, it kind of, the folks that we're meeting with, Annie Duke and Ben Felix, kind of are folks that I admire so much, but sort of from different phases of my life. I used to be a really avid poker player, and I used to watch Annie Duke on TV from her former life as a former pro poker player. And then, you know, in the work that I do today, Ben Felix is just such a great ambassador for a lot of the type of just education and in finance and in behavioral finance. So I love the work that he puts out. So it's just been super exciting. Why don't you tell me some of your takes, Hal?
Yeah, so I mean, today's episode is great. It's all about decision-making and sort of making smarter decisions. And like you said, we were really lucky. We had some great guests. So we had on the advisor side, we had Ben Felix. He's the Chief Investment Officer of PWL Capital and the co-host of the very popular Rational Reminder podcast. And then, of course, Annie Duke, who is a former, as you said, former professional poker player. She's the author of several best-selling books, including Thinking in Bets, How to Decide and Quit. She's also the co-founder of the Alliance of Decision Education and earned her PhD in cognitive science, cognitive psychology not that long ago, a couple of years ago. I just, I'm going to let the listeners hear it, but I would say to me, what was so special about this episode is the discussion of decision-making process and not just outcomes, and the very deep ways that we can go about doing that, and what it means to know more than just a passing familiarity with, popular terms from the social sciences, but actually how to put the knowledge of those biases and decision-making tendencies into practice. So to me, that was what was most exciting here.
Yeah, I absolutely love just recognizing that good decisions can have good and bad outcomes, bad decisions can have good and bad outcomes, and that if we don't recognize that, we can be very likely to assume that any good outcome was a great decision, and any bad outcome, was a bad decision. And so I think all of the context that Annie and Ben provide around that and so much more, I think folks are really going to love and find fascinating. I certainly did.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, let's get to the episode.
Annie, Ben, thank you guys so much for being here. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I'm a fan of both of yours, and I think this topic is going to be really illuminating. From my standpoint, making decisions is really, it's at the core of being an advisor. Or to some extent, I think you could just say it's at the core of being a human being. And I sort of suspect, I don't have like an empirical data point on this, but I suspect that a lot of people are trying to improve our decision-making processes and strategies, but it's probably less common that folks have thought about ways that we can really, truly do this in a systematic and strategic way. And so that's the big topic that I want to dive into today. And from my perspective, there's no one better to do this with than the two of you. So Annie, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully that's okay.
No, it's okay.
Later
a lot of pressure.
Well, later you can tell me, did I make the right decision to do that? There's my one decision-making joke. So, you open up your How to Decide book, which is a great book. You open it up by asking readers to do this clever exercise where you say, think back over the last year. I think you said something like, think back to the worst decision you made and think back to the best decision that you made. I'm curious if you could talk to me about the insights that arise. I don't want to give away the punchline. I'll let you sort of do that. I'm wondering if you could talk to me about the insights that arise from that exercise, and then we'll take it from there and go to Ben.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite exercises. I actually do that when I teach. I open every class with that exercise. I have people take out some actual paper and write their thoughts down. And I encourage people who are listening to this to actually take a moment to think, well, what was my worst decision of the previous year, and what was my best decision of the previous year? So they'll think that through. They'll think about what that was. And then I just ask them a question. So when you think about your best decision, did it turn out well? And of course, 100% of people are like, yeah, that was amazing. And when I say, well, when you think about your worst decision that you made, did it turn out poorly? And 100% of people raise their hand. Why is this really important to point out to people? Well, because that's impossible. And the reason that it's impossible is if we think about decision making in sort of a 2x2 matrix, right? Like good decision, bad decision, good outcome, bad outcome, that we know that all 4 quadrants must be populated. There are bad decisions that you make that have great outcomes. There are good decisions that you make that have bad outcomes, and good decisions that you make that have good outcomes, and bad decisions that you make that have bad outcomes. So what I'm pointing out to them is that we're doing this thing called resulting. So in academics, it would be called outcome bias. I find that name kind of boring and not so catchy. So I a little bit rebranded it and called it resulting. And it's basically saying, when I know the result of a decision, then that should tell me whether when the decision itself was good, but it can't be true, particularly in a world where luck can influence the outcome. What I find is that when we're thinking like in the financial world, this becomes really hard because, you buy a stock, it goes down. Was that a bad decision?
Mm-hmm.
You buy a stock, it goes up. Was that a bad decision? And we think that we know just because the asset increased in value or the asset decreased in value, but we absolutely do not know that. We need to know a lot more about the decision. Why does that matter? Because the way that we become better decision makers is by closing feedback loops in an accurate way, right? Like we make decisions, we have experiences about what might happen in the world, and then we use that information to go back and sort of analyze the decision so that we can change our decisions for the better going forward. But if we go around saying, well, gosh, I went through that green light and I got in an accident, so it must have been a terrible decision, then we're going to stop going through green lights. And that's really bad to do. That's going to make your outcomes in life worse. And it vice versa. If you say, I went through the red light and nothing happened, I didn't get a ticket, I didn't get in an accident, so let me keep doing that, then obviously you're going to increase the chances that you have a bad outcome. And it's true not just for going through traffic lights, but really for any decision that you make. If you get this wrong and you just assume that the result tells you everything you know, you're going to change your behavior in a way that's going to make your decision making worse.
I think this, by the way, I think this is so smart. First off, just to rebrand outcome bias to resulting. I mean, psychologists are great at coming up with understanding human decision-making processes, but terrible at labeling the biases, if you will. And resulting is so smart. And I mean, I'll say personally, when you described it that way, that really changed the way that I go through a lot of my own decision making. So,
Thank you.
I really appreciate that. Ben, I'm curious, like to jump off of this idea. Where do you see this concept of resulting show up with your clients or, in your life, however you want to answer that? I'm curious there.
I can give you an answer for both clients and my own life. With clients, Annie mentioned this, with clients, it's so easy for this to come up with respect to investment returns. Returns are objective numbers. Like, what the investment return was. They're easy to measure. They're easy to observe. But the informational content of an investment return is generally pretty low, especially if it's a short-term return, because returns are so noisy. There's so much uncertainty about how you got to that return, that specific return, and about the future return for that asset. So I think that combination makes it really easy for investors to look at the returns of some stock that they picked or didn't pick over the last couple of years and then evaluate their decision to buy or not buy that stock on that basis. With clients, this will often come up with stuff like individual stock picks, a stock that they want to buy or own. If the stock does well, they'll often think that, hey, that was a good decision to buy or to continue to hold that stock. But I think that the issue, and again, Annie did also mention this, in investing, outcomes are largely driven by external factors, not by whatever the person thinks is going to drive the return of that stock. And outcomes can change really quickly. Like the outcome today can be very different than tomorrow because stock prices are so volatile. They can drop or increase a lot in a short period of time. So it's really hard to know. whether you were right or lucky. And then if we step back and ask, what are the base rates on picking stocks? Like, is picking stocks a good idea, generally speaking? The data would say that no. I mean, most stocks underperform. Picking winners is really hard to do consistently, and you're much more likely to pick a loser than a winner. Now, all of that is a lot easier to explain to someone who has lost on their stock picks than to someone who has won on their stock picks. So
True.
We try to talk through clients with that. We try to talk about, and largely, I mean, this came from our conversation with you on our podcast years ago, Annie, talking to people about process rather than outcome. Why did you make the decision that you made? What new information would lead you to change your mind? And instead of looking at what outcome did you get, think about, did you make a good decision based on the process? And I think when you explain that to a client or to an investor, they generally do get it when they talk about it with an advisor, but it's not always obvious to them prior to getting that outside perspective.
Yeah.
I have an interesting example from my own life. If you guys want to hear that one.
Okay, let's do it.
So it's not that fun of an example. I told you about this, Hal, because we deferred doing this podcast because of it. I was diagnosed with testicular cancer in January of this year. I'm fine. Yeah. I've got one testicle now, which is kind of funny to talk about, but I'm okay. But I immediately started looking for what bad decisions did I make for this to happen? Like what have I been doing wrong?
Wow.
Is there too much plastic in my house? Am I eating too much red meat? All that kind of stuff. And I explained my concerns to my oncologist, and she was like, this just happens. It's a random thing that happens to some people, regardless of their lifestyle choices. Like, don't stress about it. Don't worry about it. But that was for me. Like I was resulting. I was like, man, I got testicular cancer. I must be doing something wrong. But again, that outside perspective from the oncologist, she was like, no, you're good. Don't worry about it. This just happens sometimes.
Well, first off, Ben, I am so glad that you are okay now. And that's such an interesting example because, in thinking about resulting, oftentimes I go to this place of, well, I give myself too much credit for an outcome that I didn't maybe have as much to do with, or I don't think as much about the process and how I can improve it. And this is the sort of flip side where now you're talking about almost you're talking about giving yourself too much credit for something that you didn't have control over, which is really difficult to do that. Annie, I'm curious, maybe this is an aside, but maybe, I don't know, maybe not. I am curious how you got to studying these topics. You're this incredibly accomplished poker player. You're an educator, you're a researcher, and congrats again on the recent PhD from Penn.
Thank you.
I think that's still worth celebrating. I know it's been a year or two, maybe, right? But
and I think it's been 2 years.
3.
2
You
years,
know what?
3 years?
Still,
I don't
in
know.
the grand scheme of things, that's small.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess one of the things I'm wondering is, like, was it your forays into poker and education that led you to study these topics, or were you always interested in these topics and that led you to the poker and education? Or, well, okay, the part of the reason I'm asking is because I'm trying to ascertain how much we can change these aspects of ourselves. Are these things that we just come by, or is it something we can change? I suspect you have a thought here, but I'm curious about your answer.
I do actually have a thought. So let me just tell you briefly how I came to it. I started off my adult life actually in academics at the University of Pennsylvania. I did 5 years worth of doctoral work, got sick, which was not in my control. And had to take myself off the job market. I was actually about to go out for all my job talks. When I left, I had an NSF fellowship. I just didn't have any money. And so I was taking a year off and I just needed money. That's how I started playing poker. And I just I had a knack for it and I kind of liked it. And I didn't feel good. So sort of being hidden away and doing this thing kind of seemed right. And then I just was like successful at it. So I ended up not going back out onto the job market at that time. But what I was studying at UPenn at the time, it was really a hub of kind of this nascent field, which was cognitive science.
Yeah.
So I got to take classes with people like John Barron, who's one of the fathers of judgment and decision making. My advisors were Lila Gleitman and Henry Gleitman, who were amazing and incredible cognitive scientists. So I had always sort of been thinking about this problem of, like, in particular, learning in uncertain systems. So I was studying how children learn their first language, which, funnily enough, is exactly how Steve Pinker got his start. Because
Yeah.
when you are thinking about that, you start thinking about the mind writ large and
Yeah.
how we kind of sense make and connect things. And how do we figure out that this sound dog means dog? Not so obvious
Right.
when you actually start
Right.
to, right? Like, because
Right.
if I pointed at dog, it could be a whole bunch of things. It could be like
Yeah.
fur, dog, animal, object, think. I don't know. It could be think or walk or something. Anyway, it's actually quite a hard mapping problem. So anyway, that's what I was thinking about at the time, which is its own form of learning decision-making under uncertainty. So now I start going and playing poker, and that's decision-making under uncertainty, under high stakes and time pressure. I can't see your opponent's cards. There's a lot of luck that drives the outcome. And what I noticed was this problem of how people connect outcomes to decisions in this two very specific ways. That when people were sort of thinking about other folks, it was always they lost, they played bad, they won, they must be great. And that's sort of that classic resulting thing. But I noticed this other thing that I think was kind of interesting, and I thought about it when Ben was speaking, which was for themselves. When they won, they'd say they played great, and when they lost, they'd say they got unlucky. So luck became a convenient way to advance their self-narrative in a positive way. And I'm sure I'd love to hear from Ben, but I'm guessing that he's experienced this, that when people pick a stock because they're like, I'm going to buy Target because I go there a lot. Just so you know, that's a very bad way to pick a stock.
Right. Right.
Some people think it's well, it must be popular because I go there. Or, I really like the food at that restaurant chain. When they pick a stock that way and they do well, they're like, oh, I'm so great. This is such a good strategy. But when they pick a stock that way and they do poorly, they say, well, I just got unlucky. Like, that wasn't really my fault. Something else happened. Right. And so I saw this as kind of this consistent problem, both like, if I'm going to learn from other people, then I can't be a resulter. And if I'm going to learn from myself, then I can't do this thing called self-serving bias. So when I rolled out of poker, before I rolled out of poker for a decade, I actually overlapped the two things, because at some point it dawned on me that what I was doing at the poker table was the same as what I had been doing in graduate school. And I started to think about the way that those things might inform each other. Rolled out of poker in 2012, decided I really wanted to write books on the topic because I felt like I had a little something to say about it with my weird background. Started consulting in finance from early stage venture all the way to options trading. Founded the Alliance for Decision Education and started teaching again, because I had previously been a teacher. And people say to me, oh, you've done so many things in your life. And my response is, I've only ever done one thing, which is studied this problem of decision-making and learning under uncertainty. To answer just the second part of your question, it's a very quick answer. Can you do something about it? The answer is no, if you're thinking this. If you think, okay, I know about it, so now I can stop myself from doing it. Meaning, like, if I know about, say, the sunk cost fallacy, that I'm going to mistakenly take into account what I've lost in an equity and deciding whether I should continue to hold that equity, and now I know that that's an actual problem, that you won't do it, then the answer is no. You can't do anything about it. It's a little bit more meta than that. And this is something that I really learned from poker, trying to get a control of these sort of malign forces in my own career, because I have these biases just like everybody else does, is that you actually have to think about how to structurally change your process and environment in order to mitigate the effects of the biases. So you can't just go, I know about it, now the bias will go away because I know about it. You have to say, what are the things that I can do structurally that are basically going to make it really, really hard for me to impale myself on my own biases? I think that this can't be said enough, because I know so many people who read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman and thought they were cured.
Yep.
And they're not. So I
Yeah.
think that's the thing that I would say was the biggest learning from poker that I then took in to sort of merging these two things together.
I think that is such an important point to make. Sorry, Ben, I don't know if you're going to jump in there, but just to say that, the good news is that there's a lot of great academic work that's made its way into popular culture and popular knowledge by some of these books, yours included, Thaler's, Kahneman's, Thaler and Sunstein's, Kahneman's. And yet then there's this, I think, tendency, like you said, to say, well, I read that book, or I skimmed it, or I got to page 20 and read this synopsis, and therefore I know this stuff and my life is better. But without putting it into practice, robust strategies, you're going to fall prey to just simply knowing about it and not changing
That's
behavior.
exactly right. And my favorite thing is I've talked to some portfolio managers who say, oh, yeah, well, I know about the sunk cost fallacy. So I just imagine every morning, what if I didn't own these stocks? And I'm like, oh, silly you. Right? Like, sorry, you can't thought experiment your way out of this. Now, if you sold the stocks every morning, but obviously with transaction costs, that's not really practical. Although I think it might be worth it, but I'm not sure. If you sold them, like if you literally sold everything you had on Monday, I think it would be worth the transaction cost. But I've never actually done the math on that. But you can't just thought experiment your way out of this. Like, what if I didn't own it? Because the fact is that you do own it. And less owning it, you can't imagine it, right? Not in that moment anyway, right? You could imagine some future version of you, and that would actually work, but not you in that moment, because it's just not the way that our brains are wired. But that's, I think, sort of like the upside and downside of behavioral economics making its way into popular culture, right? Is that people were like, got it. Now I can imagine my way out of it, or I because I know it, I'm not going to do it. And so in some way, I think it was good that it gave people the knowledge about it, but without the practical tools, I actually think it might be like net bad.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Ben, I mean, I'm going to jump off of this because I think jump off of what Annie's saying here. It's funny because from the outside, and I'm probably going to succumb to some resulting here, but from the outside, you appear to me, and I know you, as somebody who makes good decisions. You have, like, I think by last count it was 1 million children. I can't remember the exact number. You're really well respected. You have this very popular podcast. Your firm is doing great. And again, that's my resulting bias. But my question here is, like, do you have processes, to Annie's point, do you have processes that you put in place to enhance not just the outcomes, but the way that you get to those outcomes, regardless of what they may be, as a function of luck and whatnot?
Yeah. So I have 4 kids, by the way.
I'm tied. I have an infinite number of kids also. We're tied.
Yeah. Well, both of you have double the number of children I have, which feels like 1 million. So
okay.
Yeah. I don't have a great answer for the kids on the decision making process there, so I won't speak to that one. Fair enough. That happened the way it did. They're all great kids. So I have an answer personally, and then I can talk about from a PWL perspective too. And I'll be interested in both of your feedback on mostly on the personal side. So I think I have rules more than I have processes. I think rules are kind of like. The rules are processes. Okay, good. So they're like pre-made decisions is how I think about it. So I have stuff like every day I exercise, no matter what. And that can be, if it's just doing some sit-ups because I didn't have time to go to the gym, like I'm doing it, no matter what. I get a podcast episode every week, no matter what. And we've been doing that for 8 years. And sometimes that means whatever, working on the weekend or working late or whatever, but it's happening no matter what. I don't know what else. I ordered the salad at restaurants. Because it's like, sometimes you're super hungry and you really want the burger, and then you get the burger and it's like, man, I wish I didn't eat that. So you just have the salad rule. I don't drink alcohol. That's an interesting one because there's a lot of social pressure to drink alcohol, and we just have a rule. I don't drink alcohol. It's a lot easier to try and, like, no, I'm not drinking today or whatever. Anyway, so I like rules. I invest all of my extra cash into the same factor tilted diversified equity portfolio. Again, no matter what. I don't think about picking stocks. I don't think about doing angel investments. Like, if I have extra cash, it goes into the same thing. Now,
I thought you
I'm
were going
not-
to say you invest into the favorite store or restaurant that you go to, but okay.
That's the old. That's what Peter Lynch used to say. I think buy what you know. But as Annie said,
Right.
that's not a great way to make investment decisions.
Yeah.
No, that's a terrible way to make a
Yeah,
business.
it's terrible. So I have these rules, and I'm not perfect on following them all the time, but I really like having the rules because it just makes it really easy to make decisions. And making decisions is hard. I mean, you guys know that as well as anybody, probably better than most people know that. Making decisions is really hard. Life is messy. Like I've got 4 kids yelling at me half the time when I'm trying to make a decision, which makes it even harder. So I have these rules and I follow the rules, and I made the rules based on the outcomes that I want to get. It doesn't mean I'm going to get perfect outcomes. Like the cancer example, I eat the salad and I exercise, but I still got the cancer. But I think that the rules are designed to get the outcomes that I want. So that's how I approach it personally. And then from a PWL perspective, we're a fairly large firm, at least by Canadian standards. We have a lot of employees, we have a lot of portfolio managers and advisors, but we're very process driven and we make decisions carefully. I'm largely informed by talking to people like you. I mean, we've had both you guys on our podcast. Hal, we've had you on a bunch of times. We try and take that information about where decision making can go wrong, and we do everything to force ourselves out of those errors, to not impale ourselves on our own biases, like you said, Annie. So one example of that from an investment perspective is that we have a pretty short list, a pretty tight list of approved securities that our advisors can use when they're building client portfolios. And anything beyond that pretty short list of securities has to go through a pretty significant due diligence process. It has to be approved by our investment committee, which has multiple people on it, committees are a whole other interesting thing that I think you've talked quite a bit about, Annie. Yeah. So we have processes in place to avoid an advisor just saying, I think I want to use this fund, or hearing a pitch from someone about some shiny new product and deciding, yeah, I'm going to invest client money in that. We have processes in place to avoid that. I think another interesting place that's complementary to that is on the financial planning front, as opposed to portfolio management. We have a pretty comprehensive, and we spent a ton of time developing it, financial planning checklist that it outlines the financial planning strategies that make sense for clients in various circumstances. So if you have a client that is in whatever the circumstance is, you can look at the financial planning checklist, and you should be considering these strategies or these tactics. And that takes it out of the advisor's hand to feel, or whatever, I don't know how else they would do it, figure out what they should be doing for the client, and they just look at the checklist. So they've got this framework that leads to, I think, much more consistent outcomes for clients.
Yeah, so I'm gonna step on Hal's area of study for a second here,
Great.
if you don't mind. I'm just gonna step on it.
Go for it. Do it.
So I use a lot of these strategies as well. So what a lot of what you're talking about on the personal side is called a category decision. It's a form of a pre-commitment contract, which is just you, when you're not in front of the burger, are saying, as I think about myself writ large in the future, right? What are the things that person in the future do I think would be good for them or bad for them? And it turns out that when we're not in it, like one of my favorite quotes from Daniel Kahneman is, nothing is as important as it feels when you're thinking about it. Which is great, right? Like, because when that burger is there, it's just like super hard to resist. So if you're thinking, what does my future self want? It turns out that we're just much more rational about that person than we are about us now. So I also use those strategies all the time. I have I'm a vegan. That takes out a whole category of stuff. Right? I don't have to think about it. When I look at a menu, I can't eat a real burger. I don't eat any processed foods, ultra processed foods. Obviously, all foods are processed in some way, unless you pull a carrot out of the ground. But I don't eat anything ultra processed, right? So that's just something, it's just off the table for me. I just don't eat that stuff, right? And so what does that do for me? It's like, I can't eat a candy bar even if it's vegan, right? Like, so I just don't do that. And because I know it, like you, in the past, when I've made that choice, I always don't feel very good about it later. So I'm kind of taking care of future me by making these commitments that there are whole categories of things that aren't available to me on the food front. Or I also exercise every day. So it's a really, really good tool that, just as you've pointed out, is actually really important to apply to the investing world as well. So,
Yeah.
as an example, with my venture clients, one of the problems that we have is that as much as from the outside looking in, we can sort of be rational about the choices you should make in terms of deploying capital. When you're in it, you're not going to be very good at it for a variety of reasons. So if we think in venture about the quality of, say, the point partner, the person who's kind of the owner of that investment, right, versus the other partners, the intuition would be when you're thinking about decisions about whether to deploy more capital into that company, that point partner would have the best point of view. And that seems like a common sense. They go to the board meetings, they know the most about the company. But the problem is they're also the most endowed to that company, meaning that their identity, who they are, what their narrative about themselves, and so on and so forth, that's going to be the most wrapped up into that company than anybody else. And this is true of people who've picked a stock or who own a car or whatever it might be. We sort of value those things more. And so what's going to happen is that the point partner actually is more likely to overvalue what the expectation for that company is compared to somebody who has knowledge about it but isn't point, right? It doesn't have ownership over it. So once we can kind of understand that there's some counterintuitive things going on, we can say, okay, but point partner does know the most about it. So what if they make rules about 6 months from now, right? If that company were coming up for a new round where we might think about deploying capital into it, what might be true? What would have to be true of that company in order for us to feel like they do that? So now you kind of get a twofer, right? You get the knowledge of point partner without the extra bias that point partner carries with them because they're deciding they only get to eat a salad. It's literally the exact same thing, right? And so this idea of I'm going to decide I can only eat a salad for a future version of me is so incredibly powerful even in places where people think, well, investing is mathematical and we have analysts and we have quant work and, we can do all of this analysis. So obviously we're not going to be biased, but it's not true. You have to use these tools and these strategies in any type of decision making you're doing. Particularly if it's high stakes, you ought to take the time to do that.
So, I'm hearing I'm hearing a lot of different good ideas here. One of well, I have some questions about like other processes, but one of the questions that I have is how hard is it or how easy is it to adopt new processes? Because, and this kind of goes back to the example you were talking about earlier, Annie, with, I read the book and now I know the thing. You have to get from that knowledge to then actually doing the thing. And I mean, Annie, I can start with you and then I can go to Ben too, but like, what do you think is the biggest barrier to adopting new processes and how do you get over it or how do you recommend to your clients to get over it?
So if you really have good process in your big decisions, so I just want to be clear for low stakes decisions, I don't really care. Like a checklist is a good way to do it. You don't need to do a whole bunch of analysis. Like when you're trying to decide, assuming that you're within category, do I want chicken or fish?
Right.
Please don't run a whole decision process on that. I'm begging you. If it's low stakes, don't do anything about it. But I assume we're in the high stakes decision world, right? I want to be clear about that. In order to really get it right, you got to do a bunch of stuff that doesn't feel so natural, number one. So I hope that you have a decision rubric. So you have some predetermined point of view about what makes an investment good or bad. You've written those things down. You are quantifying your qualitative opinion. Say, on a scale of 1 to 7, how strong do I think the market is for this particular asset? What does the competitive landscape look like? Whatever it might be, right? And you're rating those things. And you're recording them for all time, by the way. I also want to point that out. You're making forecasts. You're thinking about what are the necessary but not sufficient things that have to occur in the future for me to think that this is a good investment. You're forecasting the probability of those things. You're taking time to do a premortem, which is mental time travel. I'm imagining that I got a bad outcome. Let me figure out why that is. Let me look back and say, what were the early signals that I was starting down that path? If I see those signals, what am I going to do? And not only are you doing it, but let's say we're a group, we all do it independently of each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So now, why is this hard? A variety of reasons. Number one, people love to talk in groups. It feels good. It's like hashtag creative and we're like jiving and like, but it's terrible, right? So we want to do it independently and asynchronously because that helps to debias the group, right? Because we're not biasing each other in those conversations, but it's very unnatural. Number one. Number two, and this is, I feel this very strongly, is that people really love the idea that they came up with the decision by magic. Because if they came up with the decision by magic, then that's about them, that they're special, right? Like they're special in comparison to other people. So people love this idea of like, no, I have a great nose for value, right? I don't even know what that means. I think it means your gut, that you're doing some sort, they'll say, I have great pattern matching. It's like, well, maybe so. But then let's make the pattern that you're using to match to explicit, because sometimes your pattern matching is going to be bad and we ought to find out. But people don't like that because they actually don't want to know they're bad. That's, I think, a really important point is that when you do that, you're exposing yourself to the idea that you may find out that the pattern you're using or your gut isn't as good as you think it is, particularly because if you're recording it for all time, we can now take lots of investment decisions, map that onto how those assets unfold, like do they do well or not? And now instead of looking at one asset doing poor or not, you can look at hundreds of decisions that you make pass or not and actually figure it out. But maybe I don't want to find that out, right? Which I think is actually like a really important point that's overlooked is that if I say it's my gut, it's special to me. And then I don't want to find out that my gut isn't good because it feels really good to go around saying, I have this thing that's special to me and you don't have it. And so that makes me special. So what I try to do with my clients is say, you are special because you're doing something nobody else is actually willing to do. And there's a tremendous amount of being special in that. You're exposing yourself to finding out that some of your signal detection isn't so good compared to other people. You may find out that some of your signal detection is quite good compared to other people. You're going to find out where other partners are better at certain things than you are, and also vice versa. You may find out that you had a model of what makes a good investment. And then when we got the data, because we rated those things in a quantified way over and over and over again across a bunch of different decisions, that some of the things that you really thought were part of that model aren't signal at all. And that's a bummer, except it's great for your future self. Because when you find that out, all the decisions that you make after you've discovered that knowledge are going to make you better. And if you're willing to risk a temporary hit to your identity by doing something that people don't want to do because it exposes you to something that's scary, you're going to win everything because you do that. And you have to create that reframe for people in order to actually get them to engage.
Man, I love that reframe. That is so powerful. That's such a great perspective, right? Because I agree with you. It can be hard to sort of shine the flashlight and see, oh, things aren't as good as I thought they were, and do that sort of deeper analysis. But then, like you said, it doesn't have to just stop there, right? You can then clean things up and make them better in the long run, right? Which is great.
I don't want to go through red lights. If I'm going through red lights and it's wrong, please tell me.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing, is that I want to know that. Now, why is it that this is where sort of back to an original thing that you asked, like in terms of poker, why is it that I'm so open to that? Well, because in poker, in 2 seconds, you have no money. So like you just have to figure out a way to be okay with finding out that you played a hand badly, that you won. That's a bummer. I won a hand. I get to, put it in the yay column of my identity.
Right.
And now by analyzing it, I'm exposing myself to moving that into the, that column, the bummer column. But like you figure out so fast that you have to be okay with that you have to be willing to do that, because otherwise it's so fast cycle that you have $0. And one of the things that I actually try to point out to people, because you can see this naturally occurring in finance, and Ben, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, is that if an LP talked to an options trader and said, "Tell me about your process," and the options trader said, "I have a great nose for value, I'm a good pattern matcher, and a wonderful gut," the LP would give them $0 because it's fast cycle like poker. They know, no, you have to have process, you have to have guardrails, you have to have checklists and rules and a risk manager and someone telling you when to take risk off, or so on. So like they know that about that. But when they talk to a venture capitalist, which is very long cycle, and the venture capitalist says, "I have a nose for value, I'm a great pattern matcher, a really good gut feel," they're like backing the truck up to give them all the money in the world because that sounds so amazing. And so what's going on? It's like one environment is disciplining you to being really hungry for accurate feedback. And the other environment is like, whatever, I invested in Uber at some time and I'm great. And it would be the worst thing that ever happened to me in my whole life for me to find out anything different. So I'm just going to tell everybody how great I am, and then they'll give me money anyway because the environment doesn't force them to do anything else.
Ben, I'm curious your perspective on that. And then I'm going to go to a lightning round with you guys.
I mean, in our world, we have taken the approach for our portfolio management that we are extremely systematic. So I mentioned that short list of approved securities. We're pretty much only using either market capitalization index funds or systematic factor tilted funds from companies like Avantis and Dimensional Fund Advisors. And that's it. And again, that comes back to base rates. We look at the market, we look at the products that exist. Are there managers out there who could convince us, even with a good rubric for evaluation, that they maybe could be expected to be good in the future? Maybe. But the base rate probabilities of that being true for the next 20 years are pretty low. And even if we, maybe we could try really, really hard and maybe we could find an inactive manager. But then the next question is, from the perspective of our clients, is that really going to help move them toward their goals? Given the uncertainty that we're introducing with active management, traditional active management. And we've taken the position that no, we can't do that. So those examples were great, Annie, of evaluating different types of managers in different contexts. But we've taken the approach that we're just not going to play that game at all whatsoever. And it's worked great for us. It's worked great for our clients. And people come to us for that reason, because so much of our industry is doing what you described, Annie. They're trying to create their own process to identify managers. They're meeting people. They're doing whatever they can to make good decisions. And then they're selling that to clients. But again, the data show us that doesn't tend to work very well. And I think in the US, there's been a big shift toward more systematic, low-cost investment approaches. In Canada, that shift is happening more slowly, but it is happening. People are realizing that is what gives them the best expected outcome. So that's how we approach that.
Yeah, but I think I think that goes into that same category that it advances your self-narrative to say, I'm the picker.
Right.
Right. As opposed to say, well, when I look at the base rates, I've really thought about this, and it's very clear that like I ought not to think so highly of my ability to pick.
Right.
And instead I should say, like, I should be looking at these funds because that's actually the better choice. Now, you still get to feel great about yourself because you're doing great for your clients and you're recognizing a problem that other people have that they're not addressing, right? And that's where that reframe idea like becomes so incredibly important, is that you have to be able to shift what you're thinking about is, no, it's not like, personally, I'm an indexer because I don't want to compete with experts, like, because I don't spend enough time on it, right? But I don't feel bad about that. Because I'm like, there's a lot in recognizing that being a good picker of active managers is not going to work out in the long run. It's not going to be best for my clients. And so that's not what we're going to do. We're going to do what's right for them. And it takes a lot of self-control and, willpower to say, that's okay.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting? I made this comment earlier with individual investors picking stocks and how it's hard to convince someone that was a bad decision if they've picked winning stocks. I think with advisors, it's even more extreme. If I find an advisor who has been successful picking active managers for their career or even a part of a career, convincing them that indexing makes sense or that factor investing and systematic investing makes sense, it's just never going to happen.
Okay, guys, I'm going to do 2 really fast questions for you, 2 like lightning round ones. So first off, this is for both of you. If you could give advisors one small piece of advice, or maybe not even small, but one thing to practice this week to become a better decision maker, what would it be? I won't call on you. I'll decide. You can decide who goes first here.
Anna, you can go first. You're going to have a cooler answer than me.
No, I don't think I don't think I am. Okay. If I could give advice, this is on the advisor side. I'm giving the advisors a piece of advice, right?
Sure.
If I were to do that, then what I would tell them is to set what I call kill criteria with their clients. So to actually walk through an exercise where you imagine, what if this goes wrong? What are the early signals that we would see that? When we see those early signals, what are we going to do about it? The reason why is that works really well for stopping them from overreacting to both bad news and good news. That's one of the biggest problems with people who are even trying to index is they overreact. And we know that historically, that you want to be investing at all cycles of the market, and overreactions stop you from doing that. And so I would be asking them to do that. One of the main things that come out of that is the stock market goes down a little bit and you sell off everything. And that's a very bad thing to do, right? But you now guide them through a list that they're pre-committing to. They're now owners of that list along with the advisor. So you're not having to come in after the fact in the moment when it feels so scary for them. You can just remind them, right? So now you're in it together. With a good list that you've generated together in some way where they've now committed to what their actions are going to be in the future under different types of news. That's the biggest thing that I would ask people to do.
I love it. All right, Ben, what about you?
That's a really cool idea. Mine is actually related to that. So one of my favorite questions to ask when thinking about investment decisions specifically is to ask, what happens if you're wrong? I think that's a question that everybody should be asking, and I don't think it's a question that gets asked enough. So it's like people come into a decision usually with a strong conviction about what they think makes sense. But I think you have to imagine a scenario where whatever you believe is going to happen or the way that you think is going to work out, it's going to work out differently, or you're going to be wrong. It's not going to work out the way that you hoped. And you have to imagine what's that going to look like for you or for your client. And I think base rates matter a lot here too. So for investment products, for example, I spend a lot of time looking at different investment products. One of the best predictors, we know this from lots of data, one of the best predictors of future investment product performance is their fees. A high fee product with a really good back test, it doesn't have a great distribution of expected outcomes just based on base rates. So if the back test, which are notoriously not great at working out in the future, if the back test does not work out in the future the way you expect it to, you're still going to be stuck paying the high fee. So in that case, if you ask the question, what if I'm wrong? You can assume that at the very least, you're going to pay a whole bunch of fees that you wouldn't have paid otherwise. And then for individual stocks, it's even worse. The distribution of individual stock returns is so skewed. So that what if I'm wrong question, the bad case there is even more extreme. But I love that question. What if I'm wrong?
It's a great one. Okay, last question for you guys. Annie, is there one thing that you'd want, advisors to know from the academic side that we didn't touch on? It can be quick, or anything that you'd want Ben and other advisors to know from the research side that maybe we didn't even touch.
Oh, let me think, because we actually talked about a lot of stuff.
We did talk about a lot of things. It's true.
Yeah, which was very.
You can
exciting.
say no. This is enough for today.
Okay. So this is what I would say is that the thing that I would love for people to recognize is that there are different points of comparison. And when we're trying to explain information that we have, like if you have data, for example, a stock return, it's just a description of something that's happened. It doesn't tell you why. And the way that we actually sort of form the comparisons tend to be to cast ourselves in a good light. So I'm sure that you know this because you've talked about base rates a lot, which is why I was thinking about this, that when someone comes in and says, well, I made 11% last year, they're using a comparison point of 0, of having made no money, which is the completely wrong comparison point because the stock market may have made 17% the year before. And this is a really big problem in terms of the way that sort of people explain the world, is that there's different things that you can compare things to. And we tend to be very good at cherry picking a comparison that advances the narrative that we want to advance. So this is something that I would want financial advisors to be really, really uh, aware of, not just for the client, but also for themselves, right? Is that you have to always be thinking, what's the right comparison to make? Comparing to base rates is your best place to start, by the way. I would prefer that people compare to a base rate than to zero. But to really recognize, like, am I making the right comparison here for the conclusion that I'm trying to draw?
That's great.
That
All right,
is
Ben,
great.
what about you? Anything you'd want Annie and me to know, any other researchers to know from the practice side? Anything you'd even want us to study more?
I do have something. I do just want to say real quick that base rates are like huge. That's when we talk to clients, probably one of the biggest things that we're doing is providing base rates, because they'll come in with some belief or some assumption, and you give them the base rates, and oftentimes they'll be like, oh, I didn't realize that's what I should expect. Anyway, so I think that's really important. On the academic research, I would love to see more research on, it's kind of what we've been talking about, the impact that advisors have on their clients' decisions.
Yeah.
There is a bit of research out there on this. Not a ton, but there's some. But I would love to see, like, how well do advisors moderate the biases of clients?
That's great.
How do advisors affect the asset allocations of their clients? Which is tough because, what's the counterfactual? I would love to see a study of like a cohort of clients before, what their asset allocation before and after becoming advised. That kind of stuff I think would be super interesting. And there's just not enough of that research out there right now.
All right, listen, both of you, thank you so much. This has been just a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate both of you taking the time. Thank you.
Well, thanks you. Hal. This was really fun. It's nice to see you again, by the way.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. Oh, I don't know if you're talking to Ben or me.
Both of you.
Likewise to both of you. Yep.